As a language learner, one of the most common pieces of advice you'll get is to speak early and speak often. People assume that if you're not good at speaking, the solution is simply to just speak more. But what if I told you that your whole approach to language learning is wrong, and that the best way to do it is actually to speak as little as possible? See, almost everyone wrongfully assumes that it's from speaking or outputting that we grow our language abilities. But when you think about it, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. If all you know is, let's say, 500 words, then how would that increase to 600, 700 or 1000 words without actually hearing and understanding more new words? You can't just magically make that number increase from using the words you already know and create sentences with them. So how would that be an effective way to learn new words? The answer is that it's not effective, and that's sort of the issue with speaking. It's viewed as this great and sometimes mandatory activity that you should do as much of as possible to learn a language, when in reality it's just simply inferior to doing the opposite of outputting, which is inputting. The reality is that you acquire language in one way only, which is understanding messages in that language. And this means that if you hear a sentence containing, let's say 10 words, by you already knowing most of the words, for example 7 or 8 of them, you can fill in the blanks and therefore learn 2 or 3 words just based off of context. Now, this is possible to do with speaking. But the thing here is that it's not actually the speaking that's giving you the benefits. It's what the other person is replying back to you with, and their feedback that's going to help you learn a new language. So you might be asking yourself, well, if you can learn language from having a conversation, then why shouldn't you do it? And that's what we'll go over right now. Now, there are a few reasons for this, but the first one is actually quite simple. And it's that it's just a whole lot slower than focusing 100% of your time on input and trying to understand the language instead. Just because you can get some kind of benefit from an activity doesn't warrant it becoming something you do regularly. Because you want to look for the things you can get the biggest reward from, not the things that are just okay and will give you some reward. Now, this is probably a pretty bad analogy, but it's like wanting to invest your money and you see something that gives you a 10% return and something else that gives you a 9% return, and you're like, well, 9% is better than 0, so I'll put some money into that, and then also some money into the 10% return thing. Not thinking that you could just put all your money into the 10% return thing and straight up get more money back. It's sort of the same thing here. If you know listening to the language straight up just teaches you more language than speaking it, then why speak it as well? You don't get magically more benefit just because you're doing more things. Just put your time and effort into the things that give you the most reward. It's pretty simple when you think about it that way. And in the case of language learning, the thing that gives you the best reward is comprehensible input. Basically, TV shows, YouTube videos, books, articles, anything really, that's some sort of content which is kind of comprehensible to you. So you want to focus your time and effort on doing these things, and also things that help this input become even more comprehensible, which could be studying vocabulary or grammar independently. So long as you're regularly able to identify words and sentences in this content, you're gonna be learning languages effectively. But if it's a little bit too hard for you, you can always study some grammar or vocabulary independently, like I said, to make it a bit more comprehensible. Just remember to always keep content consumption as your number one focus when learning. This, repeated over a long enough time, will teach you hundreds and thousands of words, as well as exactly how to use them properly. Since you've been preparing yourself by seeing native speakers use the language for hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of hours, instead of having spent all that time focused on creating sentences when you yourself aren't even ready for it to begin with. And that brings us to the second reason for why speaking just isn't gonna teach you a language. The second reason is that speaking should be done, but not before you're actually ready to do it. And this is because speaking doesn't teach you a language, but rather refines your already existing ability to use it. Trying to speak before you at least know a few thousand words is like trying to build a house when all you have is a handful of bricks. Can you build something out of it? Sure, but why not just spend your time gathering more raw materials instead if the thing you want to build takes way more bricks than what you currently have? Now, this isn't to say that you have to know everything about a language before you start speaking, as I do definitely think you can start speaking too late as well. But if you know you want to be able to have conversations at a level that requires, let's say, 5,000 words, then why are you speaking when all you know is 500 words, thinking that's magically going to teach you the rest of those 4,500 words that you don't know yet? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you instead focus close to 100% of your time on just trying to understand the language, then you already have a great foundation when you do decide to start speaking. Since all you have to do at that point is to teach yourself the physical sounds required to speak the things that you've been hearing in your immersion content since day one, which is really not going to be that hard. And this brings us on to the third reason for why speaking isn't going to teach you a language. The third reason is that speaking too early is quite likely to lead you to develop some bad pronunciation habits and an incorrect way of speaking. If most of your time has been spent on grammar, vocabulary, and outputting, then that also means that you haven't spent a whole lot of time actually listening to and hearing how the language is supposed to sound. So when you do want to start speaking, you're probably going to be using the words in an incorrect manner since you don't have much context to go off of. And so if you start speaking at a very early stage, before you have a good understanding of the language, then you've probably been continuously mispronouncing some words or using them in the wrong context, which will mean that you've probably developed bad habits that are going to be pretty hard to break later down the line. Now this could probably be somewhat mitigated by only speaking to a teacher whose job it is to teach you the language. But I'd still argue that this approach is quite ineffective compared to focusing most of your time on input, which will teach you the language way quicker and also proper pronunciation and how to speak properly from hearing correct speech over and over again in your input that you've been consuming for hundreds or thousands of hours. If you want to learn more about comprehensible input and how to use that in the most effective way possible to learn a language way quicker than you could from speaking, then you should check out my guide on the topic on the screen right now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys there.